poetry is very like painting.
Many layers and levels.
Experiments, secret languages, conversations are open. I was always making exactly what I wanted to make, a context of a bigger political conversation. Well, in the past, I maybe have been talking to historians and they tell me about an incident or something or a person that contributed in some way in a historical context. And I think, how might I use painting to fill that gap in history, as the histories, the written histories, the histories that are shown in museums. How might I make a series of work that fills that gap? Sometimes that's the thing. Sometimes I want to make a piece of work in which the engagement with an audience is really important. I want an audience to come incredibly close to the idea. So then I would paint on found objects with the idea that when an audience is encountering something like that, they understand absolutely what is a plate, what is a chair, what is a drawer, and so are not at all afraid to come close to it physically, but mostly, I mean, come close to it in terms of being very relaxed and open to conversation. Whereas there's a tendency with work on canvas for there to be some kind of, a humbleness sometimes on the behalf of the audience. This is a canvas, so it's rather grand, it's historical, it must be important, must be different than me, better than me, all of which I think is nonsense. But with an object, that's never the case, because audiences completely understand the object. Then they try to work with how I have reimagined that object. Sometimes it's important for me to have for the audience to have a real interaction, but I can usually with the work, but I can usually only do that when I'm working outside the museum, because in a museum context, you're not allowed to touch things. But when I'm making installations in galleries that are art galleries rather than art museums, audiences are sometimes allowed to move things, change things, touch things. And that's another way of working. Yes, I mean, I've spent a lot of my life reading poetry. Early on, I was writing poetry, but I don't write poetry anymore. I write a lot of text, sometimes in letter form or diary form. Quite interested in that as a kind of insight into the everyday. And I always have poetry books, old novels, political books around in my studio. And I'm interested in text. It's slightly more complicated when I'm exhibiting in a country where the language is not English. So I'm, in a sense, imposing the English language on an audience that doesn't necessarily want to or need to speak English. So that is a little bit difficult, but I find the whole notion of what is it like to be, especially in a European country, where, say, French or German or English is your second language, a way of trying to belong in those places is to learn that language. And what does that involve? How much do you lose of yourself in that attempt to find yourself in a new place? So I'm constantly troubled by and questioning language and words, and how they can be very intimate, but how they can be very make big distances between people. I think the thing about poetry is that it's very like painting. So in a poem, generally speaking, the words are very carefully chosen. There are less words, for a start, than if you make a narrative text. And I think that the best poets are writing in order to just give you a clue, just a hint, and to lead you into a bigger conversation or a bigger place to think. A lot like what happens when you're trying to paint a painting. So you give an audience a flat piece of canvas with colours on it, which is kind of quite slight and small, but you're enabling audiences to use their own imaginations and expand on that. So I think painting is incredibly like poetry. It's not really like a novel or a political text in a sense. When I'm looking at my work and when I'm making my work, I am listening to music, to programs on the radio, conversations. Sometimes in England, on Saturday afternoons, we have football matches. And so the commentators have to describe the football match. So you have to understand the game of football, but you also have to have a very visual sense, because they are describing each player and each move that each player is playing. So I very often, when I'm making work, I'm listening to that kind of narrative, seeing the picture of the football match in my mind and painting against that. So all that noise, all that conversation, all that music is always in my paintings because it's in my head, and it often has been over the years in the room while I'm making this work. I had a lot of conversations with Magda Stavaska-Bevan over the years about print. She is a printmaker as well as a sound artist. And those kinds of ideas of layering, ideas of language, and then ideas of the layering of sound in opera. So that in an opera, many, many things are going on. You can, 5 people can be singing at the same time in an opera. Some of them are singing about what they're feeling. Some of them are singing about what they're thinking. And some of them are having an actual conversation. But they're all singing to the same song, if you like. So it's a kind of multi-layered thing. Then they are in a costume, and then they are in a set, and then they are within a narrative. And I'm interested in those multi-layers and how it's possible to experience those multi-layers all at once. I think the thing about this exhibition is that there are big political issues, but there are tiny moments where 2 people in a painting may decide to do something or not do something. And the painting is painted in the moment between the question and the answer, so that either one of those people's lives could go in a completely different direction depending on the answer. And I want audiences to sort of understand that. Those sorts of moments, and I think everybody does when you say that, those sorts of moments are extraordinary, and your entire life can change because you said yes, or because you said no, or because you said I don't know. So those are the issues. They're not really issues. Those are the sort of moments that I'm interested in painting at the moment. As sort of the subtle, seemingly small feelings that then could develop into much larger situations. And this is, in an exhibition like this is presented within a context of a bigger political conversation.